Hi there and good evening. Welcome to the Jim Bohannon Show from Westwood 1. We're at 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626, and on the web you'll find us at jimbotalk.net. So tonight we delve into the question, who killed John F. Kennedy? No, you have not picked up a time warp, Twilight Zone echo of this program from 20 years ago or even 44 years ago. We are approaching the half-century mark since that assassination. It is believed that more words have been written about the John Kennedy assassination than any other single one-day event in world history. Close to 1,000 books have been written, so why the need for this book, which happens to be the one in front of me here, and it's large. Just let people hear what 1,612 pages sound like here. That's large. It's a large book. Vincent Bugliosi is our guest, former prosecutor in Los Angeles, the author of Helter Skelter, who is with us tonight to talk a little bit about this book published by Norton. Okay, first of all, did Charles Manson do it? Probably not.
Well, I hope so. I mean, I asked the jury to send him to his death in the gas chamber.
I meant, did he kill John Kennedy?
Oh, did Charles Manson kill John F. Kennedy?
I thought we should touch all bases tonight.
Okay. No, I don't think so. I think he's innocent.
All right, very good. Now, then, to answer that question, why one more book? Has not everything been said that could be said out of 1,000 books?
No, not really. There are some books that have come to the correct conclusion, but hopefully this book will be more persuasive than anything that's ever been written before. Number one, Jim, this is the first book, Reclaiming History. Let's tell the audience the name of it.
The Assassination of President John F. Kennedy is the subtitle.
It's the first book that's ever covered the entire case. No one has ever attempted to do that before. The area is so vast that literally authors work on the subject, let's say, for 5-10 years, and they'll just write on the CIA or the mob or Oswald or Ruby or the prosecution of Clay Shaw in New Orleans. But this is a book that covers the entire case. In fact, there are many things I get into here that are not even in the Warren Report or the House Select Committee on Assassinations report. Also, Jim, it has always been the conventional wisdom that there would never be a satisfactory resolution to this case. Even among those people who felt that Oswald killed Kennedy and acted alone, they always felt that there would never be a completely satisfactory resolution. There would always be some remaining doubt in this case. And what I say is that anyone who reads this book with an open mind has to come to the conclusion that Oswald killed Kennedy and acted alone. It settles all questions about the assassination once and for all. It's also the first book that takes on all these conspiracy theorists and destroys all their theories. There is no other book out there that takes on all the conspiracy theorists. There have been anti-conspiracy books, but I'm talking about books that take on all of these theories, the right wing, the KGB, Castro, anti-Castro Cuban exiles. I have a chapter on all of these, and I think that by the time you read the individual chapter on organized crime or CIA, you can only come to one conclusion, and that is that there was no conspiracy in this case. Jim, I haven't even told you to thank you for having me on the show. It's always an honor to be on your show, sir. Thank you. I find it difficult a little bit to speak candidly about reclaiming history because when I do, it sounds boastful. But the alternative is not too good either. And let me just quote to you, if I might, because it's a little better when someone else toots your horn, that the sound travels twice as far. A recent review just in the L.A. Times says, "At last someone has done it, put all the pieces together. With reclaiming history, from this point forward, no reasonable person can argue that Lee Harvey Oswald was innocent. No sane person can take seriously assertions that Kennedy was killed by the CIA, Castro, the mob, the Soviets, etc. Bugliosi has definitively explained the murder that recalibrated modern America. It is a book for the ages." And when I set out to write this book, that was my aspiration, to write a book for the ages, and I feel that I've achieved that. I know it sounds boastful. I've had other, best-selling books, Jim. I've had 3 others that reached #1 in the New York Times bestseller list, and I didn't talk that way about those books. I wouldn't even dream of talking about it that way. But this book's a special book. And you were mentioning the 1,600 pages. Actually, there's a CD attached to it with another 1,125 pages of endnotes. The question frequently asked of me, why write a book so long? Well, number one, like I said, it covers the entire case. Number two, Jim, there are two separate realities in this case. The first reality is that at its core, this is a very simple case. Within hours of the shooting in Dealey Plaza, virtually everyone in Dallas law enforcement, I'm talking about the Dallas Police Department, Sheriff's Office, local office of the FBI, it was very obvious to them that Oswald had killed Kennedy, and when they found out what a complete kook Oswald was, they drew the inference that who in the world would conspire with this guy. So within, I'd say, about 24 hours, virtually everyone in local Dallas law enforcement knew that Oswald had killed Kennedy and acted alone, and that is one reality, that this is a simple case. But there's another reality here. Here's the other reality. Because of the unceasing and obsessive fanaticism of literally, and this is not an exaggeration, literally thousands upon thousands of Warren Commission critics, conspiracy theorists, who have investigated every single aspect of this case for close to 44 years and made hundreds upon hundreds of allegations, this simple case has been transformed into its present state. And what's its present state? I'll tell you what its present state is. It's now the most complex murder case by far in world history. Nothing even remotely comes close to this. In manuscript form, just to give you an example, one of my endnotes, I'm not talking about the main text now, I'm talking about on the endnotes. One of my endnotes on acoustics was 120 pages with about 60 footnotes. So we have this strange phenomenon of a simple case that's no longer simple because of the countless, endless allegations that have been made.
Okay. Let's look at a few aspects of this. You quote through the years national polls that have consistently shown the percentages of Americans who believe there was a conspiracy in this assassination. Usually you say it's in the 70 to 80% range. Why do we love conspiracy theories? Because there has been a similar, although I think smaller, thought about the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. And probably if we dug deeply enough, we would find similar thoughts about who knows what. Certainly Dr. Martin Luther King, maybe Gandhi, for all I know.
Right.
Why do we love this sort of thing?
Well, I think human beings love a conspiracy because it's a lot more interesting. If you were to watch a TV show at night and everything was open and shut, you wouldn't really watch it. So it's much more interesting. But there's much more involved here when we come to the Kennedy assassination. And I think there are many, many reasons why people want to believe in a conspiracy in this case. I'll just touch on a couple of them. I think that instinctively, people want to believe in a conspiracy in the Kennedy assassination because the belief that powerful forces killed Kennedy because they felt he was taking this nation in a direction that was antithetical to their interests, in a strange type of way, Jim, gives more meaning to his life and death. Certainly more meaning than the belief that he was killed by some lone nut with a deranged mind. In fact, Jackie Kennedy, President Kennedy's widow, said, we don't even have the satisfaction of his dying for some cause, like the civil rights movement. And she said he had to be killed by some silly little communist. And these are almost her exact words. She said, it robbed his death of meaning. Okay. So I think that's one reason. Another reason is that there's this visceral yet illogical feeling that someone as inconsequential as Oswald could not do something as consequential as change the course of American history. People, they don't articulate this thought in their mind, but I think they find it intellectually incongruous that someone whom they perceive to be a king, I'm talking about Kennedy, could be struck down in a moment by someone they perceive to be a nonentity. They just have this sense that something more has to be involved. And yet you and I know, Jim, that bullets are very democratic. Mm-hmm. They kill or injure whomever they hit, and there's just no, it's not important, or you don't have to be an important person to pull the trigger.
All right. A lot to cover here. We're going to try to get most of it in the time that we have tonight as we talk with Vincent Bugliosi, former Los Angeles prosecutor, the author of Helter Skelter, and now he has written Reclaiming History, the assassination of President John Kennedy, published by Norton. And it's on the Jim Bohannon Show tonight, brought to you by Tylenol Rapid Release Gels with unique laser-cut holes to rapidly release the powerful pain relief of Tylenol. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Jim Bohannon Show at 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626, as we speak tonight with former Los Angeles County Deputy District Attorney Vincent Bugliosi, the author of Reclaiming History, published by Norton. It is definitive, and I don't know what could possibly be left out of this book. But here it is, and that's what we're talking about in the next hour. One thing before we take a call or two here that I should bring up, probably something that has just come out in the very recent days here, an article in the Annals of Applied Statistics written by former FBI lab metallurgist William Tobin and Texas A&M University researchers Cliff Spiegelman and William James. They have challenged the bullet analysis used by the government to conclude that Oswald alone fired the shots that struck and killed John Kennedy. They do not argue per se that, in fact, Oswald was the lone gunman or not. They merely urge authorities to conduct a new and complete forensic reanalysis of the bullet fragments because of what they feel was an inadequate method of testing, one which apparently has also been agreed to by the FBI because they have since that time changed the method they use in such tests. Are you familiar with this?
Yeah, it's in my book. Okay. So here they're talking about something that supposedly is new that just came out today, and it's not new at all. Well, the statement is new here, but what they're talking about is what they call neutron activation analysis, and they take these bullet fragments and they put them under a nuclear reactor. And by sophisticated instrumentation, the nuclear reactor tells the reader of the instrumentation the elemental composition of the fragments. I'm talking about elements like silver, antimony, copper, etc. And if the
trace elements that ordinarily aren't thought of as part of the lead, but in fact they are. Right.
And if the concentrations are very, very similar, then they draw the inference that the fragments came from the same batch of lead. Mm-hmm. Now, that used to be the belief. Subsequently, tests have shown that metal from other batches of lead could have very, very similar concentrations of these trace elements. But that's an old story. So they're coming out with something in the Washington Post. I'm not criticizing the Post. I mean, the Post published it, but the statement that they published is an old statement, and it's in my book, Reclaiming History. It's nothing new at all, and I can tell you this, that the neutron activation analysis argument, that was not conclusive of the single bullet theory. That was just corroborative. The single bullet theory does not rely on neutron activation analysis at all.
No, and these people, again, are not saying that there is flat proof of a second gunman, merely that the evidence put forward to prove one gunman in this context alone was a flawed methodology which the FBI
That's a good articulation, yes.
All right. 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626. Martin calls in from Fairbanks, Alaska. Good evening.
Yes, Mr. Bugliosi, it's a real pleasure to speak with you. I've read most of your books and enjoyed them all.
Thank you, sir.
Sadly enough, The Betrayal of America was, I think, a very important book. Not, I would say, enjoyable reading, but necessary reading. But I wanted to ask you, I tried to order this book you're discussing from Amazon, I'd say almost 2 years ago, and it was apparently delayed, and even though there were reviews refuting it on Amazon, the book, it wasn't available yet for some time. Why the delay?
Yeah, there were people reviewing the book before it even came out. Why the delay? Let me tell you. Any project that we take on in our life, I think intuitively, without even giving it a second thought, we know, Martin, that if we work long and hard enough, we're going to reach the bottom of the pile. We don't even have to give any second thought to it. the Kennedy assassination, I can tell you this, there is no bottom to the pile in the Kennedy assassination. It is absolutely endless. Jim just
You're
read...
telling me even this is incomplete?
Well, no, it's not incomplete in terms of the proof that Oswald killed Kennedy and there's no conspiracy, but it's incomplete in the sense that, for instance, what you just read to me that came out in the Washington Post, I don't have that in this book. I have a discussion of that same issue, but not the recent thing that just came out today.
Okay.
As I'm talking to you right now, there's at least 100 people in this country. It's getting kind of late at night, but there's at least 100 people working full-time looking at every single document they can find for some hint of a conspiracy. There's 1,000 people working part-time, and they can come up with a lot of mischief. So the reason for the delay is that new books kept coming out. I kept responding to them, and finally my publisher said, Vince, that's enough. We're going to press. If he hadn't said that, I wouldn't be on Jim's show tonight. I'd be home working around the clock answering some other conspiracy theorists. I got sucked into the abyss and I couldn't get out.
All right, very good. More calls here coming up in a second. One thing I've always wondered about, there are many files relating to this case that are closed and I guess will remain so for several decades. And certainly long enough for every participant to be dead. Yeah. And I've always thought that the surest way to blow all of these theories out of the water is to open those files. Why? What possible reason could there be for keeping those files locked up?
Okay. 99.99% of the American public believe that the Warren Commission sealed the records for 75 years. I thought that before I got involved in this case. That's 100% wrong.
There are no files out there that are locked up.
Well, it's not quite that simple. Let me explain. The Warren Commission published the testimony of every witness who appeared before them. That's in the Warren Commission volumes open to the American public. They also published hundreds upon hundreds of documents in the Warren Commission volumes. When they closed shop on September 24th, 1964, those documents that were not published in the volumes were turned over to the National Archives. And I got a hold of the cover letter from Earl Warren to the National Archives, and I quote in the book from that letter, Earl Warren said, I hope there's going to be the fullest disclosure possible of these documents to the American people. Now, the records originally were sealed for 75 years. It had nothing to do with the Warren Commission. It was an old National Archives rule that provided that when they got documents from a federal investigative body like the Warren Commission, and the report of that body did not contain documents, and those documents were turned over to the archives, the rule at the National Archives that we're going to seal those documents for 75 years, believed to be the ordinary lifespan of a human being. That rule is no longer applicable because of the Freedom of Information Act in 1967 and the JFK Act in 1992. That rule does not apply anymore. But let me tell you this now. Those documents, 100% of the documents at the National Archives have been seen by the House Select Committee on Assassinations and the Assassinations Record Review Board. They've seen all of the documents. The American public has not. There's a small fraction of 1%. The document is available, but there are redactions in it, meaning there are lines crossed out. Those are invariably, when those are finally declassified, and they have been throughout the years, invariably they deal with invasion of privacy, national security, etc. Even those documents are going to be released in the year 2017. But the point you got to
in about 5 seconds.
Okay, well, but the point
since we don't, I don't think we're going to make it in 5 seconds. Okay. We'll be back with more here. Vincent Bugliosi, our guest, the book Reclaiming History, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to the Jimbo Hannon Show. We're at 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626, talking with former Los Angeles prosecutor Vincent Bugliosi, the author of Reclaiming History. It's published by Norton, and we have a call from Frank in Savannah, Georgia. Hello, Frank.
Hi, Jim. How you doing?
Fine, thank you.
I thought Gerald Parker's book, Case Closed, settled the Kennedy assassination once and for all. He came to basically the same conclusion you did. But you're saying your book goes beyond his book because you address the conspiracy theories?
Well, you have problems with some of his methodology, don't you?
Yeah, Posner wrote a good book, and I give him credit for that, but there are two problems. One is credibility. There are things that happen where he is not happy about it because it's antithetical to a position he's taken, and he tends to do the same thing that the conspiracy theorists do. He either ignores it or he distorts it. But despite that, he wrote a good book, but no one under any standard of measurement could say that Case Closed is a in-depth evaluation of the entire case. My book is 6 times larger, not because I'm 6 times more verbose, but I get into all types of things that Posner does not get into, and all types of conspiracy theories that he does not even address. But nonetheless, he wrote a good book.
All right. And to Ian in Fayetteville, North Carolina. Hello.
Good evening. How did you shoot down the grassy knoll theory, please?
Okay.
Well, the grassy knoll theory doesn't make any sense for all types of reasons. If the shot came from the grassy knoll, which is to the president's right front, why weren't there any entrance wounds to the right front or the right side of the president's body? There were none. There were 2 bullet entry wounds. One was to the upper right back of the president. The other one was to the upper right back of his head. No entrance wounds on the right side of his body. That's one reason. Also, any shot from the grassy knoll traveling at 2,000 feet a second, you know it would have either passed through Kennedy's body or at least gone to the left side of his body, and we know that never happened. The president had no injury to the left side of his body. For instance, the head shot, the autopsy showed that the left hemisphere of the president's brain was, quote, intact, unquote. No one saw anyone with a gun on the grassy knoll. No weapon was found there. No expended cartridges from a weapon. It never happened.
What about the exit wound in the back of the head, as you discussed here on page 408?
There was no exit wound in the back of the head. All you have to do is look at the Zapruder film. I got frames of the Zapruder film in the book subsequent to frame 313 when he was hit in the head, and there's no giant hole in the back of the head, and yet the conspiracy theorists claim the shot came from the front, and there's this giant hole in the back of his head. That's absolutely wrong. Just all you have to do, he was shot in the head at frame 313. Look at any of the frames subsequent to 313, and you see the back of his head, and you don't see any wound. He had thick hair covering that small entrance wound. And yet the conspiracy theorists claim there's this gigantic hole in the back of the president's head. The Zapruder film disproves that fact out of hand.
All right. And while we're on the subject, just a few other things. The pristine bullet.
Not pristine. Pristine means what? It means
untouched,
perfect. Untouched.
Okay.
No. The conspiracy theorists don't show the base of the bullet in their books. The base of the bullet was heavily damaged, and I have a photograph of it in there from the National Archives. 2.4 grains of the bullet had been lost. You have to realize this was a military-type bullet, fully metal-jacketed, the very type that's designed to cause damage to objects it hits without doing too much damage to itself. So it was not a pristine bullet.
The acoustics of Dealey Plaza. What can you say about the acoustics of Dealey Plaza?
Well, the acoustics are such that the plaza resounds with echoes, Jim, and there was a confusion as to the number of shots and the origin of shots, but the majority of people in Dealey Plaza thought the shots came from the book depository building. Many thought the shots came from the grassy knoll, but there's, again, no evidence that any shots came from the grassy knoll. It doesn't even make sense, a grassy knoll shot, for the simple reason that if you're going to be a sniper, you're going to kill the president, you're not going to position yourself to the president's front and be within the range of vision of everyone coming down the road. What you're going to do if you're a sniper, and whoever killed Kennedy, forget about Oswald for a moment, was a sniper. The headline New York Times next day, Kennedy killed by sniper. What you're going to do, you're going to wait until everyone's looking forward, and then you pick off the president from behind, which is exactly what Oswald did.
Okay. Some of the other things that we need to cover. Fidel Castro did it.
Well, but there's no evidence of it, you know, and there's about 10 theories on conspiracy, and I can just talk about that and take up 5 minutes. The problem is that you got organized crime and CIA, and I would like to, if you'll let me, I would like to address the whole issue of conspiracy, which will include Fidel Castro.
Well, all right, I know you want to get these out.
Well,
so
the only problem is that there's so many theories, and we only have so little time.
We do only have so much time, although I was hoping to cover each in turn, but if you wish to do it this way, that's fine. okay, the two questions you wish to pose are, did Oswald do it? And two, did Oswald act alone? Okay, let's do that then.
Well, let's see if we can summarize literally billions and billions of words into a minute or two, addressing ourselves to each one of those questions. On the issue of whether Oswald is guilty, I learned as a criminal prosecutor, and I think it's just common sense, that if you're innocent, chances are there's not going to be any evidence whatsoever pointing towards your guilt. But now and then, Jim, because of the nature of life, the unaccountability of things, now and then one piece of evidence will point towards your guilt, even though you're innocent. Sometimes, in rare situations, even 2 or 3 pieces of evidence pointing towards guilt, even though you're innocent. But, Jim, I point out in the book 53 separate pieces of evidence pointing towards Oswald's guilt, and under those circumstances, it would be humanly impossible for Oswald to be innocent, at least not in the world in which we live, Jim. You know, I'm talking to you, you can hear me, there's going to be a dawn tomorrow, not that world. Only in a fantasy world can you have 53 pieces of evidence pointing towards guilt and still be innocent. Let me just quickly give you some of the pieces of evidence. It was his weapon. The murder weapon belonged to Oswald. After the shooting in Dealey Plaza, he's the only employee at the book depository building who flees the book depository. He's the only one that leaves. 45 minutes later, he shoots and kills Officer J.D. Tippett. That murder bore the signature of a man in desperate flight from some awful deed. 30 minutes later, he resists arrest, pulls a gun on the arresting officer. During his interrogation, he told one provable lie after another, all of which show a consciousness of guilt. That's just 5 pieces right there. I give 53 in the book. Anyone who says that Oswald is innocent, I say that either he's totally unaware of the evidence or he's just a silly person. Now, on the issue of conspiracy, see if I can summarize that for you.
Okay.
There's no credible evidence that any of these groups or people like Castro or LBJ or the mob or the CIA or the military-industrial complex, no credible evidence that any of these groups were behind the assassination. All there is a naked speculation. When I prosecuted the case in London in 1986, Jerry Spence, your friend, you know who he is, he defended Oswald. I told the jury in London, I said, you know, folks, I'll stipulate that 3 people can keep a secret, but only if 2 are dead. And here we're 44 years later, not one word, not one syllable has leaked out of any of these groups being involved in the assassination. Number 2, there's no evidence that Oswald ever had any association, any connection with any of these groups. None at all. And believe me, the FBI conducted 25,000 interviews.
Some would point to the Fair Play for Cuba Committee.
Well, that's not a connection with any movement by Castro to kill Kennedy. He was certainly pro-Castro. There's no question about that. But that's not a connection with Fidel Castro per se. He had never even been to Cuba. Number 3, well, what I was getting into is that the FBI checked every breath this guy ever breathed from the moment he arrived back from Russia to the United States on June 13th, 1962, until the day of the assassination. They accounted for virtually every day of his life during that period. He was a loner, and believe me, if he was associating with Castro or any Castro agent or the military-industrial complex, they would have known about it. Number 3, let's assume one of these groups wanted to kill Kennedy. To me, it's preposterous on its face that they would say, let's murder President Kennedy. But let's assume that for the sake of argument. Okay. Oswald, Jim, would be one of the last people on the face of this earth whom they would go to. Why? I'll tell you why. Number 1, he was not an expert shot. He was a good shot, but he was not an expert shot. And if you're going to pull off a murder like this, you're going to get an expert shot to do it. Number 2, he had a $12 mail-order rifle. Number 3, notoriously unreliable, extremely unstable. Jim, here's a guy that defects to the Soviet Union pre-Gorbachev. I mean, even today, who in the heck defects to the Soviet Union? He gets over there, he wants to become a citizen, they turn him down. What does he do, Jim? He slashes his wrists, tries to commit suicide. Someone's going to rely on him to commit the biggest murder in American history?
What about this variation, that Oswald was simply used as a stooge to draw attention away, that maybe Oswald even thought he was part of the conspiracy, but that Oswald was set up to divert attention from the real assassination team.
But what evidence is there of that?
I don't know.
And if that, I wanted to reach my 4th point. There's no evidence of that. Right. But number 2, if he's set up, he's set up. He's a patsy, all right? Okay. How do they get him then to kill Officer J.D. Tippett? How do they get him to flee the building? How do they get him to resist arrest? Apparently he's innocent, right? And he's set up. So how did they get him to do all these terrible things?
Well, of course, under that theory, maybe Oswald was told to go take shots, but that they didn't really care whether he hit anything or not.
But, Jim, we have to talk about evidence.
Okay.
I want to give you the final point on the conspiracy thing.
Okay.
Let's make the assumption that one of these groups said, let's murder Kennedy, and for whatever crazy reason, they decided we want Lee Harvey Oswald to kill Kennedy for us. Let's see if where that takes us makes any sense.
Okay, let's take a break before we do that, because we do have to pay a few bills here.
Okay.
Vincent Bugliosi is our guest, and the book is called Reclaiming History, The Assassination of President John F. Kennedy. We shall be right back here at Westwood 1. Welcome back to the Jimbo Hannon Show. We're talking with former prosecutor Vincent Bugliosi, the author of Reclaiming History, The Assassination of President John F. Kennedy, and we had a fourth point regarding conspiracy.
Well, I was saying, Jim, just for the sake of argument, let's assume that one of these groups decided, let's murder Kennedy, and for whatever preposterous reason, let's get Lee Harvey Oswald to do it. And I was saying, let's see if where that takes us makes any sense. After Oswald shot Kennedy in Dealey Plaza and left the building, one of two things would have happened, Jim, and I'm going to tell you the least likely thing first. The least likely thing that would have happened, there would have been a car there waiting for him to help him escape down to Mexico or wherever. Certainly the conspirators would not want their hitman to be apprehended and interrogated by the authorities. But the most likely thing, by far, that would have happened, and I think you already know, Jim, what I'm going to say.
Sure.
There would have been a car there. If the mob or CIA was behind it, there would have been a car there waiting for him to drive Oswald to his death. Instead, what we know is that he's out on the street with $13 in his pocket trying to flag down buses and cabs. I mean, come on. That's silly. That fact alone tells you there was no conspiracy. In fact, the presidential motorcade that went right under the window of Oswald, that route was not even determined until November the 18th, 4 days before the assassination. No rational person could believe that the CIA is going to come up to Oswald, conspire with him to kill the president within 4 days of the president visiting Dallas.
People have said that, well, let's put it this way, the president went to Oswald about the change of route there. It wasn't that Oswald went to the president. In point of fact, it wasn't until that last-minute change that the motorcade would have gone nowhere near the book.
Yeah, but they would have had to get in touch with Oswald to ask him to kill Kennedy for them within 4 days of the visit.
Exactly.
That's not believable.
Not believable either. 1-866-50-JIMBO. And we have Mark in Reading, Pennsylvania. Good evening.
Good evening. By the way, before I get to my question, Mr. Bugliosi, I'd like to congratulate you on your work with the Mansons.
Thank you, sir.
Read the book Helter Skelter. It's great.
Mm-hmm.
My question is, okay, I understand as far as an overall thing there was no conspiracy, but I was old enough at the time to remember when Ruby shot Oswald.
Right.
And I saw it live on TV, and the reason I remember it is because I was a little kid, and I remember Oswald looking at Ruby and saying, "Ruby, you S.O.B." Called him by name and swore at him, and that's what stuck in my mind.
That was not Lee Harvey Oswald.
No.
As a matter of fact, if I'm not mistaken, those words were uttered by a police sergeant who, in fact, knew Jack Ruby.
That's right. He said, "Jack, you son of a..."
Yes.
Yeah. No, Mark, you have it wrong there.
But a police officer did utter those words because he was well known to the Dallas.
He was a friend of the Dallas police. He was a police buff. He'd hang out at the police station, very close to the Dallas Police Department.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so you did hear the words, but they did not come from Lee Harvey Oswald. Okay, other issues here that we should cover. We talked about the pristine bullet. What about the magic bullet?
Well, Jim, the magic bullet, here's the conspiracy theorist, just flat out lying. What they do with their sketches, of course we're not on TV here, but if you can imagine Kennedy, and what they do, they place in their sketches, and I showed in the book, they place Connally seated directly in front of Kennedy.
Governor John Connally of Texas.
And then they make the argument, a bullet coming from where Oswald was, from right to left, passing through soft tissue on a straight line, after it exited Kennedy's throat, to hit Connally, they say, it would have had to make a right turn in midair and then make a left turn to go out to hit Connally. Now, and they say that's a magic bullet. Bullets only do that in cartoons, if at all. If we start out with an erroneous premise, Jim, everything that follows makes a heck of a lot of sense. The only problem is that it's wrong. Connally was not seated directly in front of Kennedy. I've got photographs in the book there. There's no question about it. He was seated in a jump seat, a half a foot in. He was seated to Kennedy's left front. So a bullet passing through Kennedy on a straight line, soft tissue, had nowhere else to go but to hit John Connally. Now, in London, Spence called Cyril Wecht to the witness stand. Cyril Wecht was the coroner of Allegheny County at the time, and Wecht testified to the magic bullet. On cross-examination, I said, now, Dr. Wecht, I said, if the bullet passing through Kennedy on a straight line, soft tissue, and you agree with that, he says yes. If it did not hit Governor Connally, as you say it did not, why didn't it tear up the interior of the limousine or hit the driver? He says, I don't know. So I got a little sarcastic with him, and I said, well, now, doctor, because this is cross-examination. I said, now, doctor, if it didn't hit Connally, and it didn't hit the interior of the limousine, and didn't hit the driver, it must have zigzagged to the left. And he said, no, it did not zigzag to the left. I said, did it hop, skip, and jump over the car? He said, it did not have to perform any remarkable feat like that. So I said, doctor, what happened to that bullet? And he said, I don't know. So who's got the magic bullet here? If we're to believe these conspiracy theorists, this bullet exits Kennedy's throat and apparently, Jim, vanishes without a trace into thin air. And yet the conspiracy theorists have convinced this country that it's the Warren Commission that's got the magic bullet. No, it's the conspiracy theorists that have a bullet that literally vanishes into thin air after it passes through Kennedy's body. It's all nonsense. It's all sublime silliness. It's moonshine.
More to come here on the Jim Bohannon Show with Vincent Bugliosi and the book Reclaiming History, published by Norton. We'll be back. Welcome back to the Jim Bohannon Show as we talk with former prosecutor from Los Angeles, Vincent Bugliosi, the man who wrote Helter Skelter and a number of other works over a career that has certainly spanned many of the seminal cases of our time. He's also the author of Outrage on the acquittal of O.J. Simpson, and now Reclaiming History, the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Okay. The head snap to the rear, and I guess the Zapruder film is probably the principal source of evidence in which John Kennedy's head would appear to snap to the rear, the kind of action that would only occur from a blow from the front.
Right. You were talking about my other books, Jim.
Yes.
This one, and I'm proud of the other ones, but this is Reclaiming History, is the book of my career. It's my magnum opus. I cannot do any better than this particular book. It's the best that I can do, and it's, as I say, it's and I appreciate the opportunity that you've given me to talk to your audience about it. The head snap to the rear, Jim, you see the president's head snapping back, and you would draw the natural inference that the shot came from the front, where the grassy knoll is, not from the rear, where Oswald is. And Spence in London showed that segment of the film 5 times and said it looks like Babe Ruth hit the president from the front and knocked his head to the rear. And he said, Mr. Bugliosi's trying to convince you that what you saw with your own eyes you really didn't see. If I couldn't have answered that, I think the verdict in London would have been not guilty. And as I think, or I may not have indicated, the jury in London came back with the verdict of guilty.
Right. Yes, they did.
If you look at the individual frames, you cannot see this by looking at the film. You cannot see it. You have to look at the individual frames. If you look at frame 312, the president's head is okay. And I have this, there is no other book, by the way, out there of these 1,000 that have the sequence of these frames. Reclaiming History does. At 312, the president's head is okay. At 313, 1/18th of a second later, there was 18.3 frames per second on the Zapruder film, you see the president hit in the head and the explosion to the head. In what direction is the head propelled at 313? I'll tell you what direction, Jim. And this is what won the case in London. 2.3 inches, his head is pushed forward. So at the all-important moment of impact, the president's head is pushed forward, indicating a shot from the rear, not backwards, which would indicate a shot from the front. Then at frames 314 to 321, we have the neuromuscular reaction, the head snap to the rear.
And that's what we see when we think we see that. Okay.
And in the book,
well,
I also have
I just have time to tell people that, again, our guest is Vincent Bugliosi. The book is Reclaiming History, the assassination of President John Kennedy. It is published by Norton, and I'm Jim Bohannon on Westwood One.